Hi, my name is Bonnie Yegidis, and I was honored to be Dean of the School of Social Work at the University of Georgia from 1995 through 2003. Well, I knew from a very early age that I wanted to become a social worker. When I was a young teenager, I was about 12 or 13, there was a show on network television at that time called East Side, West Side. And the main character was a man who was an urban social worker, and it was held by George C. Scott. And every week, I don't remember how many weeks it was on, every week he would take on a different issue related to urban poverty. Some of it was housing, some of it was racial injustice, some was lack of appropriate child care, there were some child welfare issues. And when that series ended, I remember telling my mother I was going to go into social work, and I did. When I finished my undergraduate degree, I had a brief stint in healthcare social work in New Jersey, and I enjoyed that, but I really wanted to get back to upstate New York. And I was really pleased that I got hired in a child welfare agency in the South Bronx. And my job was to do foster home placements, foster care placements in upstate New York to children who were farmed out of the city. And I really got a deep appreciation for the foster care system and the unique problems of children who are being moved out of their homes. I went to West Virginia University because I wanted to do what we called in that time social practice, macro practice. I wanted to do community development, rural development, and I had a wonderful experience at West Virginia University. And then after graduate school, I worked in child welfare in West Virginia. I did adoptions, I did foster care, I did abuse and neglect work at a county child welfare agency in West Virginia for some time. And there was a small state college not too far from Morgantown, West Virginia, and it was called Fairmont. So I taught, I believe it was a Title 20 funded BSW program. So my first job in academia was teaching BSW students. We had an accredited BSW program at Fairmont State. And I taught there for a year and then decided to move to Florida. My parents had retired there and I wanted to be closer to them. And then, so I did that. And I was, lucky in many ways to land a job at the University of South Florida full-time and into their BSW program. One of the fun things we got to do at USF is we built a clinical social work program at the graduate level. So, I had the opportunity to teach at the BSW level and then to teach graduate students. Now, I'm not some great clinician, so I didn't teach in the clinical program, but I taught research, I taught evaluation. So I worked full-time, went to graduate school at night. So it was really a good experience. I was at USF, University of South Florida, for 18 years and became, the last 3 years I was there, the director of the School of Social Work. The gentleman who started the program at USF was a mentor of mine. His name was Phil Smith, and he was a Georgia grad. And so he always, went on about what a great school of social work the University of Georgia was. And at that time, of course, Charlie Stewart was the dean. But I knew Dean Stewart from being director of the School of Social Work. And of course, I knew of Dean Stewart from my good friend, Phil Smith. So when Dean Stewart decided to retire, I believe he was dean for about 35 years. He was the founding dean, and he was, Dean Stewart is, is legendary, frankly. So when he decided to retire, there was a search for the deanship, and I applied. And I stepped on the Athens campus, and I fell in love. I was treated just so well by the staff, by the faculty, by the administration, the senior administration, that, I hoped that I would get the job. So I was working in the president's office, and then I got the call from the provost at UGA at that time, Vice President Procasey. And I liked Vice President Procasey. And so I got the job, and I was thrilled. And I packed up my family, had a young daughter, and we moved and a husband, and we moved from Tampa, Florida to Athens, Georgia. In my opinion, Dean Stewart provided stable leadership. And I knew that. I was not walking into a position where, there was not a tradition on how we do things. But one of the attributes of that position was that the school was stable, the faculty were top-notch, the staff were dedicated. So it wasn't like I walked in and I thought there were all these problems I had to fix. There were some things that needed to be done, which would be the case in any new job that you take. And so I was greeted, frankly, by the faculty and the staff in a very warm, open manner. And there were not a lot of women deans at Georgia at that time. I was the second woman dean. All the other, there are 13 colleges, or there was at that time. All the other deans were men. So this was going to be new to the school. And but I thought I had a fairly easy transition. But one of the things that we did accomplish as a school was develop a strategic plan. And I remember some of the deans laughing at me because I would talk about this in Dean's Council. And there was some discussion on campus that we were developing a strategic plan in the School of Social Work. And I remember one of the deans saying, "Do you carry that strategic plan in your blazer pocket? Because every time we talk to you, you're talking about the vision of the school and where you're headed." So we did develop a strategic plan that focused, I don't remember every element of that plan, of course, but that focused on elevating the stature of the school because we had preeminent faculty, research faculty, elevating how strong that clinical MSW program was. It was very strong. And there was also a very strong bachelor's program. But outside of the state of Georgia, it was not that well known. And so we wanted to elevate the status of the school, both in the state of Georgia, but nationally. And I do think that we accomplished that. I think one of the most rewarding accomplishments that we were able to collectively achieve was that we reinvigorated the Alumni Society and the Board of Visitors. Dean Stewart had put together what I consider to be a very high-profile Board of Visitors, and the alumni of the school were fiercely loyal to the School of Social Work at the University of Georgia. But in my opinion, they were underutilized. We had wonderful resources in both of those groups. And so we did have a functioning alumni group, and we spent a lot of time, not just me, but other faculty members and some of our staff. We got our first alumni director, but we set about a program of alumni development. And we held events all around the state of Georgia. At the big national social work education conferences, we hosted receptions so that the alums who were now in senior practice positions, were on faculty positions, would come and meet the faculty and the staff at the University of Georgia. We exhibited at conferences, and we really had a very successful alumni program. As a part of that, we began to establish regular meetings of the Board of Visitors. And I have to say, again, I give the credit primarily to Dean Stewart for assembling really leaders in social work practice from around the state. So I think the combination of reinvigorating and including the alumni in the life of the school and using the incredible resources that were provided by an external advisory board really helped to move the school forward in its growth. The other thing that we were able to do, primarily with the support of our alumni, and it was a strategic priority for me as dean, is that we were successful in funding the first 2 endowed professorships of the school. When I went to the University of Georgia in 1995, we were the only school/college on campus that had no endowed professorships. And I thought that was not just me, but the faculty and I, and of course the administration, thought it would be, very important, both for the status of the school, but also the university. And those endowments, endowed professors, then give you the budget flexibility to bring on high-powered faculty in certain practice areas, in research areas. And we were successful in doing that. We funded the first Parham professorship in honor of Jim Parham, who I knew. He had been the leader of public child welfare in the state of Georgia and was an adjunct faculty member when I arrived. But I knew of Jim Parham's work because he was nationally known child welfare policy person. And shortly after I arrived in Georgia, maybe that first year, maybe the second year, he passed away. It was very sad. And the alums loved Jim Parham. And we raised, the alums and our faculty, and of course my work, the work of the administration, we raised $250,000, which maybe today doesn't sound like a lot, but we did that pretty much on the backs of the alumni. We got donations for $25, $50. We did speaking engagements. We left no stone unturned. And it took us, I would say, at least 2 years to raise that money. I'll tell you who else was helpful in that was Ed Risler, who was a faculty member at that time. And he may be a member of the advisory board now. I think I heard that he was. I hired Ed Risler. But he was from juvenile justice, his background. But Eddie helped us too. And so we had the Board of Visitors involved. We had the alumni involved. We established that professorship. And then we did a national search. And I hired June Gary Hops, who had been the dean of Boston College. I knew her from Boston College. And she had Atlanta ties and was ready to step out of her deanship. She had a long career at Boston College, very distinguished career, as a matter of fact. And her area was social welfare policy. And so we conducted a national search, and we hired June Gary Hops to be the Parham professor. We had a very strong contingent of faculty who were dedicated to public child welfare practice and work with DFACS. And we had a contract, a training contract with DFACS. And one of our strategic priorities was to build the research profile in terms of grants and externally funded grants and contracts to the school. Because when you have endowments and you have grants and contracts, it provides additional ways to support graduate students in practicum, in research experiences. So those are very valuable sources of funding to any college and, of course, to a university. So we did build our profile in child welfare. Now, at that time, the Title IV-E in Georgia was not being funded. This was a federal pass-through program. Dollars went to the state. But we hired a child welfare expert out of her doctoral program. And she came to our school. Her name was Bert Ellett. And she did such an incredible job in developing contracts and grants in the state of Georgia that we were a leader at that time. And I know you still have the university, the school still has a very strong presence in child welfare, and I'm glad to see that that has continued. So I think we made a rather significant contribution to the practice of child welfare, practice and research in child welfare. The last thing I want to say about our particular accomplishments during my tenure as dean is there was a low-income community located in Athens that was a mixed community of ethnically diverse populations. And there was a growing presence of Hispanic families in this community. The community was called Garnet Ridge. And a couple of our faculty members were doing some work with the mayor's office in community development. And this had been identified as an area needing services. Some of the families there were of African-American descent, and many of those people owned their units. And the newer people coming in were Hispanic, and they were primarily renters, not solely. But it was a very high need area. There wasn't much in the way of childcare. There weren't activities for the kids, who were in preschool. There was no after-school program there. And our faculty, under leadership then of Dr. Jim Gordon and Dr. Larry Nakarud, and both of those gentlemen are retired now, went out to Garnet Ridge, and we met with the owner, the owner of the apartment complex, and convinced him to rent to us one duplex for $1 a year. And we established that contract. And we created a family support center that was run by the School of Social Work, that was staffed by faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, and was funded out of our own internal resources initially. And then what happened over time is the university loved the model so much because we were helping a community that other colleges want to get involved. So there were faculty and students from the School of Family and Consumer Sciences. We had landscape architecture students who developed the landscape and the playground for students. We had folks in education did English as a second language classes. So it was really a community resource center. We called it the Family Support Center. Ultimately, the faculty and the subsequent administration was successful in spinning it off to the boys' clubs, boys and girls clubs. And there is today a boys' club program in Garnet Ridge. Keep in mind, I had been director of a School of Social Work for 3 years at the University of South Florida. So I had been the leader of a social work education enterprise then for 11 years. And I really wanted to kind of climb the ladder in higher ed. And there was a change in the senior administration after Vice President Procasi, who hired me. He retired. And one of my dean colleagues at that time, Arnett Mace, became provost. So I told, Vice President Mace that, I don't want to leave the University of Georgia, but I think I want to become a provost. And he said, it's funny, I never asked him for a position in his office, but he said he was in the middle of restructuring his office. There were, I can't remember, maybe 2 associate provosts, and they were going to carve out some new areas. Would I be interested in this particular area? And I would. I told him, and I interviewed, and I got hired. So I was associate provost for faculty affairs. And it was following that experience that I realized how much I loved academic affairs. So when I came to the University of Georgia, Maurice was a faculty member there, and he taught in the macro practice track. It was called like APCO or something. There was some acronym for it. And he was in community practice and was from, well, actually he was from the Midwest, but had been on the faculty for a number of years, was a tenured associate professor, and I'm very fond of Maurice. And while I was there, he served as the MSW director for a time and did a nice job. But ultimately, Maurice came through a national search for the deanship and was selected. And I thought he did a great job. I would see him at national meetings, and he, had a particular perspective on social work practice. And he was very well, in my opinion, Maurice was very well connected to the community and to some agency heads in Atlanta. After I retired, I served on as chair of the Mental Health Association in Florida. I served as chair for 2 years of the Mental Health Association in Orlando, and I was very active in that regard. I've served on, and I just got off of one board, I served on the advisory boards, board of visitors of 2 schools of social work. Yeah. I do a little bit of volunteering now with the Jewish Families Agency in town. I want to do like volunteer kinds of things. I don't want to, I've done enough work in my life. I don't want a job, but I want to be part of a helping system in a community where I live. For me, it was a privilege to have been at the University of Georgia, to have provided whatever energy and ideas that I may have had, and to work with such a talented faculty and staff. And I really think that the accomplishments during my tenure were really the product of the faculty, the staff, the alums, the board of visitors, and really the university's support that really did move us very much forward in social work education nationally, and I hope across disciplines.